I was staring out the window of my Tokyo office, watching raindrops blur the skyline, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to pick up. Noah? The voice cracked. It's Sophie! I froze. Sophie Rivers, my childhood best friend. The only person in Ashfield I still trusted. She didn't wait for me to respond. Noah, your dad passed away last night. I didn't speak. Couldn't. We thought you should know, she said gently. The funeral's this Friday, and Eleanor's organizing the will reading. I blinked hard. She didn't call me. She said, Sophie hesitated, you're not family anymore. There it was. 5 years. 5 years since I walked out of that house, slamming the door behind me and vowing never to return. 5 years of silence from my father, Arthur Bennett, once my hero, my mentor, the man who taught me to dream in circuits and DNA strands. I had spent those years building my own future halfway across the world. A biotech startup in Japan, award-winning research, independence. But none of that prepared me for the icy burn of hearing that I wasn't even invited to say goodbye. She's saying the meeting is for family only, Sophie added quietly. But Noah, there's something else. I waited. She's already talking to investors about selling your father's stem cell technology to a private firm. Privately. No board input. My jaw clenched. That technology, the one Dad and I had begun together, the project that had launched Bennett Bioinnovations, was meant to help people, not fill Eleanor's bank account. She's saying it's hers now, that you walked away. I stared at the wall across from me. On it, framed in a sleek black border, was the patent drawing for our first project, the tissue scaffolding prototype Dad and I had built in the garage back when I was 17. I'd thought he'd given up on me, replaced me, let Eleanor and her children erase me from his life. But now, something didn't add up. Thanks, Sophie, I said slowly. I'll be on the next flight home. I hung up and sat still for a moment. Then I reached for the bottom drawer of my desk, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside was a worn leather notebook, the last thing my father had ever given me. On the first page, in his tidy block handwriting, he'd written, "In science as in life, always keep a backup plan." My father was many things, brilliant, flawed, stubborn. But if there was one thing he wasn't, it was careless. If he thought Eleanor was going to steal everything, he wouldn't have left the door unlocked. He would have made sure there was a key hidden somewhere. As I closed the notebook, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They might have erased me from the will. But Arthur Bennett was always 5 steps ahead. And I was about to find out exactly what he'd planned. The sky over Ashfield was a dull gray when I stepped off the train, suitcase in one hand, jet lag clinging to me like smoke. 5 years hadn't changed much. The same cobblestone streets, the same rusted biotech incubator signs, the same smell of wet leaves and cold asphalt. But something felt off, like I'd returned to a memory that had started rewriting itself while I was gone. A sleek black car waited at the curb. I wasn't surprised when the driver rolled down the window and said stiffly, "Mrs. Bennett asked me to bring you to the house." Mrs. Bennett, not Eleanor, not Mom. That word had never passed my lips. The ride was silent. My chest tightened as we turned onto Sycamore Lane, where I'd spent most of my childhood, in the brick colonial house with the ivy-covered lab in back. The house looked the same from a distance, but the moment I stepped through the front door, the changes hit me like a punch. Gone were the warm mahogany floors, the old oak banister, the bookshelves lined with scientific journals and photos of me and Dad at various science fairs. In their place, cold, sterile minimalism, chrome and glass, abstract art. It looked like a corporate showroom. I barely had time to take it all in before a voice called out from the hallway. "Noah?" Chloe. She emerged from the side room like a model stepping out of a catalog. Sleek ponytail, black blouse, blank expression. "We weren't sure you'd come," she said, voice flat. I stared at her. He was my father. A pause. Then, The will reading is tomorrow, at the office. She didn't ask if I needed help with my bag. She didn't invite me to sit. She just turned and walked away. I followed her down the hallway, past the living room where I used to build Lego towers while Dad read research papers, past the dining room where we'd celebrated my acceptance to MIT, all of it stripped of warmth. "Eleanor's upstairs resting," Chloe said. "Isaac's out. Your old room is being used." I stopped walking. "Used how?" She turned, almost sheepish. "It's her home office now. You can stay in the guest room." Of course. I headed upstairs, gripping the rail tighter than I needed to. Every step echoed memories: late nights helping Dad prep slides for his lectures, sneaking snacks with Sophie after curfew, the night we launched our first successful cell graft test and screamed like lunatics in the hallway. Now those walls were silent. The guest room was pristine: white walls, beige sheets, no soul. As I dropped my suitcase on the bed, I heard voices downstairs. Muffled, sharp. I cracked the door open and listened. "He's not staying, is he?" Isaac. Arrogant as ever. "He's not part of this family," Eleanor said coolly. "He walked away." "What if he makes a scene at the reading?" "He won't. Arthur handled everything. Officially, he has nothing. The patents, the rights, they're mine now." I closed the door gently, heart pounding. They really thought he left me nothing. But Arthur Bennett never did anything halfway. He wouldn't have let the empire he built become a toy for Eleanor's ambitions, not without leaving a trail. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled the leather notebook from my bag, and flipped to the final page, one I'd never read before. There, in my father's familiar scrawl, was a single line. "If you're reading this, check the lockbox behind the thermal chamber in Lab B. You'll know what to do." My pulse quickened. Lab B, the one Dad and I built together in the garage. The same garage Eleanor had supposedly shut down and repurposed last year. I stood, the fatigue of travel falling away. If she thought she could erase me, she'd forgotten who taught me how to leave breadcrumbs. Arthur Bennett may have died, but his secrets were still alive. And I was about to find them. The rain had turned to a light mist by the time I made it around to the side of the house. The garage, Lab B, as we always called it, was locked with a brand new digital keypad. I wasn't surprised. Eleanor had always been more obsessed with control than understanding. She'd have shut down the lab the moment she got the keys to the house, but she'd also never known about the override. Dad had shown it to me when I was 16. A hidden panel behind the breaker box, hardwired to the backup system, designed in case our experiments ever fried the security protocols. I found it easily, heart thudding in my ears. Pried open the metal panel. Entered the 6-digit passcode that had once been our inside joke. 04281, the day we completed our first live cell integration. A soft click. The door opened. The air inside was stale but familiar. Metal shelves lined with labeled vials. Our old bioreactor in the corner. The faint, lingering smell of ethanol and machine oil. Like time had paused mid-thought, but someone had been here. The computers were gone. So were most of the notebooks. The whiteboards had been wiped clean. Eleanor had scrubbed this place, trying to erase me, again. But not everything. I walked to the back, to the old thermal chamber, a boxy humming machine we used to run accelerated degradation tests. Behind it, barely visible beneath a loose panel, was the lockbox. The one Dad swore we'd only use if everything else failed. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled it free. The key from the notebook, still taped inside the back cover, fit perfectly. Inside the box was a manila folder, a black USB drive, and a sealed envelope labeled in neat handwriting. "For Noah. If they've locked you out." I sat on the floor, surrounded by shadows and memory, and opened the envelope. "Noah, if you're reading this, then I probably didn't get the chance to explain everything in person. That's my fault. I let anger, and Eleanor, get in the way. But you should know, I never stopped believing in you. After you left, I began seeing things clearly. The way she isolated me, controlled what I heard, what I believed. But by the time I realized how far it had gone, I was already sick. This box contains the original patent documents for our regenerative scaffold, signed, notarized, and reassigned to Origin Core, the holding company I created in your name. Everything important, the patents, the licensing deals, even the future iterations of the tech, belongs to you. Eleanor doesn't know. She thinks she controls Bennett Bioinnovations, but without these assets, it's a hollow name. You'll also find a USB drive. Watch it. There are things I need to say, truths you deserve to hear. You were always the one I wanted to carry this forward. Don't let them bury what we built. Dad. I closed my eyes, trying to steady the mix of grief, rage, and vindication rising inside me. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd been fighting for me in the only way he knew how, through planning, through precision, through quiet rebellion. I plugged the USB into my laptop, which I'd brought just in case. The screen flickered to life. There he was, Arthur Bennett, my father, gaunt, pale, but unmistakably him. He sat at his desk, looking directly at the camera. If you're watching this, Noah, then you found the lockbox. Good. That means you're still as clever as I always knew you were. His voice was thinner than I remembered, but steady, focused. You need to understand why I did what I did, why I left the company to Eleanor, at least officially. It was the only way to buy time, to protect the real assets until I could ensure they were safe in your hands. Eleanor wanted to sell, always, to license our research to the highest bidder. She never cared about the mission, about the patients, about the science. I leaned in closer, heart hammering. So I built Origin Core in secret, transferred every meaningful piece of intellectual property to it, legally, quietly, over 2 years. It's yours, all of it. And when the time comes, go to Dr. Martin Kessler. He's been helping me. He knows everything. The screen went black. I sat in the dark, staring at my reflection. Eleanor thought she'd won. She thought she'd erased me. From the will, from the company, from my own father's legacy. But she didn't realize the truth. The heart of Bennett Bioinnovations wasn't the name. It was the work. And now I held it all. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the guest room desk with the manila folder, watching my father's video 3 more times, each time catching something new. A flicker of regret, a flash of pride, a subtle smirk when he talked about outmaneuvering Eleanor. He really had planned this like a chess game. Every patent document was dated, signed, and sealed. The biotech formulas, the scaffold blueprints, the licensing contracts, they were airtight. Each one bore my name. Some were signed as founder and director of Origin Core LLC, a company I hadn't even realized existed until 12 hours ago. But Arthur had made me its sole owner 3 years ago. While Eleanor had played house and staged her hostile takeover, Dad had been building a firewall, and now it was time to use it. By morning, I'd already made 3 calls. One to my legal team in Tokyo, one to Dr. Martin Kessler, Dad's lawyer and IP advisor, now retired but still sharp as hell, and one to Sophie. She met me at the edge of the university green, coffee in hand. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, offering me the cup. I didn't. But I found something. I handed her one of the signed patent assignments. Her eyes widened. "Wait, this says you own the scaffold tech?" "All of it," I said, "and more. He left the real company to me, in secret." Sophie let out a low whistle. "Damn, Noah, you're holding the nuclear codes," I nodded, "and I'm taking them to the will reading." The offices of Kessler and Dunn sat atop a converted bank building in downtown Ashfield, the kind with marble columns, brass elevator doors, and a receptionist who looked like she'd been working there since Watergate. "Name?" she asked, barely looking up. "Noah Bennett. I'm here for the reading." Her fingers froze on the keyboard. She blinked at me. I thought, "Never mind, Mr. Kessler will be out shortly." A minute later, Martin Kessler himself emerged, late 70s now, with stooped shoulders but a gaze sharp enough to cut glass. "Noah." he said, his voice warm with restrained relief. I hoped you'd come. He ushered me down a hallway lined with framed legal degrees and faded photos of my father at biotech summits. Your dad came to me about 3 years ago, Martin said as we walked. Said he didn't trust where things were headed. Wanted to lock down the IP. Quietly, I drafted every transfer, every contract. He insisted it all be in your name. He never told me. He wanted you to focus on building something of your own, Martin replied, and he wanted to protect you from her. He didn't need to say Eleanor's name. We stepped into the conference room just as voices spilled out from inside. I don't see why we have to wait, Eleanor was saying, irritation wrapped in faux grief. Arthur was clear, everything is settled. Then silence. I stepped through the door, every head turned. Eleanor froze, her carefully composed expression cracking for a moment before she recovered. Noah, she said coolly. How unexpected. I looked around the room. Chloe and Isaac flanked her, both dressed in carefully coordinated black. 2 unfamiliar men sat across the table, likely business advisors or buyers, probably the vultures circling what they thought was an open carcass. Nice to see you too, I said, taking the empty seat directly across from her. Martin followed behind me and cleared his throat. We'll begin. As he opened the file folder, Eleanor leaned forward. Just to clarify, she said, this meeting is for heirs. And I am one, I replied without blinking. Arthur Bennett's only biological child. You remember that, right? Martin spoke before she could answer. This is the reading of Arthur Bennett's last will and testament, revised and filed 6 months before his passing. Eleanor sat back, blinking. 6 months? That's right, Martin said. It supersedes the version filed 2 years ago. The temperature in the room dropped. Chloe shifted in her seat. Isaac frowned. As per the will, Martin continued, the estate at 721 Old Birch Lane, including all contents, is to be inherited by Mrs. Eleanor Bennett. Eleanor gave a gracious nod, but her eyes flicked sideways, calculating. To Chloe and Isaac, Martin went on, each will receive a trust fund of $750,000 and non-voting shares in Bennett Bioinnovations. Chloe seemed surprised. Isaac looked annoyed it wasn't more. Martin cleared his throat. And finally, all intellectual property created by Arthur Bennett, including patents, experimental research, and future use agreements, are bequeathed to Noah Bennett through an entity known as OriginCore LLC, fully owned and operated by him. Eleanor stood abruptly. That's not possible. Arthur revoked that. I saw the changes myself. No, I said, reaching into my briefcase. What you saw was an illusion. This, I slid the folder to the center of the table, is what he really left behind. Inside, every legal transfer, every patent assignment, every time-stamped, notarized document. Eleanor's hands shook as she rifled through the pages. What is this? Isaac demanded. The company, I said calmly. The patents, the tech, everything it runs on. It's already mine. Eleanor's perfectly manicured fingers trembled as she flipped through the folder. Each page cut deeper. Notarized patent assignments, licensing deals, signed transfers, all bearing my name. All dated months, even years before my father's passing. All legal. This is forged, she hissed. Martin Kessler didn't flinch. I personally handled these documents with Arthur. Every signature was witnessed and filed with the appropriate authorities. You can verify it with the USPTO database if you'd like. This is fraud, Eleanor spat, standing so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Arthur promised me control of the company. I've been running it for the past year. These assets were supposed to secure its future. Our future. You mean your private sale to Calibrex Biopharma? I said coldly. That hit hard. Her face paled. How do you... Your assistant isn't as loyal as you think. I locked eyes with her. You plan to cash out the company for yourself, liquidate the research, sell off the licensing, then let the shell crumble. You left, she snapped. You abandoned this family. You left your father to die surrounded by people who actually cared. I didn't blink. I called, for months. You told me he didn't want to speak to me. You fed him lies. Isolated him, she scoffed, but her voice was less steady. He was confused. He wasn't in his right mind the last few years, I smiled grimly. That's funny. He seemed very clear when he said this. I reached into my bag, pulled out a sleek portable speaker, and pressed play. Arthur's voice filled the room. If you're hearing this, Eleanor is probably saying I was confused, or that I didn't know what I was doing. Let me be clear. I was never more certain of anything than this decision. Gasps around the table. Isaac's face drained of color, Chloe's lips parted slightly, eyes flicking to her mother. I've transferred this core of Bennett Bioinnovations, the patents, the research, everything we built, to Noah. He understands what it means. The company isn't just about profit, it's about purpose. Eleanor lunged toward the speaker, but I caught it before she could knock it off the table. You think you're clever, she whispered, rage bubbling behind her painted smile. But this won't hold. I'll challenge the will. I'll take you to court, drag your name through the mud. I have contacts. And I have the law, I interrupted. Arthur left the estate to you. I won't contest that. But the business? The legacy? That's mine. That's already out of the will's jurisdiction. Martin nodded. The transfer of intellectual property was completed well before Arthur's passing. The assets aren't part of the probate. They're Noah's, fair and legal. The room was dead silent. Eleanor's breath came short and fast. Her voice shrunk to a whisper. You planned this. No, I said softly. He did. While you were too busy selling his vision, he was protecting it. And protecting me. Her eyes flashed. You'll regret this. You're not ready to run a company like this. I already do, I replied, voice calm. My firm in Tokyo leads regenerative organ research across 3 continents. The only reason I came back was because this company, his legacy, matters to me. I turned to Chloe and Isaac, who sat frozen, like chess pieces left mid-game. You still have your trusts, your shares. If you stay out of my way, I won't fight you. But if you try to sabotage what Dad built, I won't hold back. Isaac looked like he wanted to say something, to yell maybe, but he slumped back into his chair, defeated. Chloe didn't speak, but her eyes were on me, not hostile, not angry, something else, curiosity or guilt. Meeting adjourned, Martin said, gathering his papers. I suggest everyone take the rest of the day to process this. Development. As I packed up my documents, I felt Eleanor's gaze still burning holes in my back, but I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. She was done, at least for now. Outside, the autumn wind bit against my skin, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel cold. I had my father's voice, his words, his trust. And now, I had his legacy. I didn't return to the guest room that night. Instead, I stopped at Sophie's place, the same brick apartment above her bookshop where we used to hang out as teens, eating cheap pizza and arguing over science fiction plot holes. She made tea. I didn't drink it. I just sat on her couch and stared at the manila folder still tucked under my arm, as if the weight of it might crush me. He really planned it all, I murmured. Every move, every fallback. Sophie sat beside me, silent for a long beat before speaking. He knew you'd come back, Noah. He just didn't know if you'd come in time. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I thought he didn't want me. Eleanor made it seem like I'd broken his heart. Maybe you did, she said gently. But he never stopped loving you. All of this proves it. I left around midnight, the city quiet, the sidewalks wet with mist. When I got back to the house, the lights were off, except for a warm glow coming from the kitchen. I paused. And then I heard it, soft footsteps. I stepped inside slowly. Chloe stood at the island, clutching a slim notebook to her chest. She turned when she heard me. "I couldn't sleep," she said. I didn't respond. She hesitated, then offered the notebook. "I found this among the boxes Mom had packed up from Dad's office." I took it cautiously. It was Arthur's handwriting, a journal. The first page dated 10 months ago. "Chloe is beginning to ask questions. Isaac doesn't care. Eleanor is pressing about the Caliber X offer again. I've told her no, for now. But I can't protect everything forever. I miss Noah." I turned to the next page. "The lab isn't the same without him. I've watched his TEDx talk 3 times this week. He's better than me. More visionary. I'm proud, even if I'll never say it aloud." By the 4th entry, my throat burned. "I made the final transfers today. Origin Core is his now. Even if she finds out, she won't be able to undo it. God help him if he ever comes back into this viper's nest." I looked up slowly. Chloe was watching me with a conflicted expression. "I didn't know," she said. "I mean, I knew she was controlling, but I didn't realize how far she'd gone, cutting off your calls, hiding his letters." "She intercepted everything." Chloe nodded. "She told us you didn't care, that you'd run off to build your own empire." "In a way, I had to," I said. "But I always thought he'd moved on, that he'd chosen all of you." A beat of silence. "Do you think he ever forgave me?" I asked. "He never stopped missing you," she replied quietly. "That journal proves it." I studied her. Chloe had always been the polite one, the peacemaker. She'd never sided with Isaac's bratty outbursts, but she'd never defended me either. Now, for the first time, I saw cracks in the mask she wore. A girl trying to be loyal to a mother who'd used loyalty as currency. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. She hesitated. "Because it's yours, and because I want to make things right." Before I could answer, a sharp knock rang out from the front door. We both turned. Another knock. Louder this time. I moved toward the foyer, flipping on the porch light, and froze. A woman stood there. Tall, early 40s, with sharp cheekbones and a calm confidence in her eyes. She looked strangely familiar. "Yes?" I asked, opening the door slightly. Her gaze softened. "You must be Noah." I nodded slowly. "My name is Eva Thornton," she said. "Arthur Bennett was my father, too." Behind me, I heard Chloe gasp. "What?" Eva stepped inside, lowering her umbrella. "I'm not here for money. I don't want the company. I needed to meet you. He talked about you all the time." I stared at her, mind racing. "But he kept our relationship private, at my request. My mother and he had a brief connection. He found me again after Mom passed. We've stayed in touch for the last 6 years." She opened her coat and pulled out a small wooden box. "I thought you should have this. He left it with me, said to give it to you if Eleanor ever tried to shut you out." Inside was a silver key and a handwritten note. "Noah, if they lock the doors, remember this. Legacy isn't what they see, it's what you build. Keep building, Dad." I closed my eyes. My father hadn't just protected me. He'd believed in me until the very end, and beyond. By the next morning, Ashfield was buzzing. It hadn't even been 24 hours since the will reading, but already the news had leaked. Eleanor Bennett had been outmaneuvered. Arthur's estranged son had returned and taken the company reins. The town's golden biotech widow? Dethroned. I sipped my coffee at Bernard's Deli, the only place still making bagels like I remembered, when Sophie walked in, a folded newspaper in hand and a look that said, "Brace yourself." She slid the paper across the table. "Illegitimate transfer. Eleanor Bennett to challenge patent ownership in court." My jaw clenched. "She's calling the IP transfer fraudulent," Sophie said. "She claims Arthur was mentally compromised and manipulated by you from abroad." I laughed bitterly. "She's really going with that?" "She's already retained counsel, high-profile firm out of Boston." I leaned back, the burn of anger hot in my throat. She doesn't want justice. She wants control. "And if she can't have it," Sophie said, She'll destroy it. I tapped my fingers on the table, thinking. She's playing public opinion, smearing my name to weaken internal support. Investors, employees, maybe even the board. Sophie nodded. She's already scheduled a town hall meeting for Thursday night. Claims she wants to clear the air. I scoffed. She wants a stage. Well, she said, leaning forward, maybe it's time you gave her one. That afternoon, I called a meeting at the Bennett Bioinnovations HQ, or what was left of it. The glass lobby gleamed like it had been polished by angels, but inside the company's core, chaos simmered. Morale was fractured. Staff were divided, loyalists to Eleanor, nervous fence-sitters, and a few hopeful faces watching me like I might be their rescue. In the small conference room, I met with the only people I trusted: Chloe, Eva, Sophie, and Margaret Lee, my father's former assistant, who had left quietly 2 months before his passing. I knew he was hiding something, Margaret said. He moved files off the main servers, took meetings off the books, but he told me to trust him. So I did. She pushed forward a flash drive. Before I left, I copied everything I could. Chloe looked stunned. You knew she was manipulating him? I didn't have proof, not then, but I had instincts. She started shutting me out the moment he got sick. I took a deep breath. We need to prepare for 3 things: legal war, media manipulation, and board pressure. Sophie chimed in. I've already started preparing a feature piece for the Ashfield Tribune. We'll get ahead of this narrative. Eva nodded. I can speak at the board meeting. I'm not an heir to the company, but I am family. And I know what he wanted. He told me everything. Chloe raised her hand slowly. I want to speak too. I turned to her. She met my gaze, steady this time. I spent years letting Mom control the story. I let her talk over me, speak for me, use me. But I read Dad's journal, and I've seen what she's willing to do. You sure about this? I asked gently. She nodded. If you're fighting for him, then I'm with you. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I exhaled slowly. All right, I said. We fight smart, no dramatics, no revenge. We win this by being better. That night, I stood alone in Arthur's old office. The walls still held faint outlines where diplomas and maps had hung. The air still smelled like graphite, cedar, and old books. In my hands, I held the key Eva had given me. I opened the drawer Dad always kept locked. Inside, a single sealed envelope. Use only if they go too far. I didn't open it. Not yet. But I knew what it meant. My father had anticipated every move Eleanor might make, and he'd left me the final one. Checkmate. When I needed it. The Bennett Bioinnovations shareholder meeting was packed, not just with board members, but employees, media, curious townspeople, even a few professors from the local university. Everyone wanted to see the showdown. Noah Bennett, the banished son. Eleanor Bennett, the biotech widow turned businesswoman. I stood at the front, flanked by Margaret and Chloe. My heart thundered, but my voice was clear. I know what's been said, I began. That I manipulated my father, that I abandoned this company, that I don't understand Ashfield. I looked out across the crowd. Some skeptical faces, some eager, some watching like jurors awaiting a verdict. But my father understood something far more important than spin, I continued. He understood purpose, vision, integrity, and he knew those things were under threat. I tapped my tablet. The screens behind me lit up with scanned entries from Arthur's journal. Eleanor is trying to pressure me into selling. Noah was right. She sees the science as currency, but it's legacy, not cash flow. Gasps from the audience. I clicked again. A short clip from my father's CEO's video. If you're hearing this, I've passed. But this is no accident. Noah owns Origin Core, the patents, the IP. That's the real company. Eleanor stood abruptly. This is emotional manipulation. That video was edited. You can't prove that Arthur was of sound mind. Martin Kessler, seated in the front row, rose calmly. I conducted every document transfer, oversaw every signature. I have sworn affidavits. Arthur was sharp, intentional, and in full control. Chloe stood next. Mom lied to me. Lied to all of us, she said, voice trembling but strong. She isolated Dad, controlled who could see him. What he read, what he heard, I was too afraid to speak, but I'm not anymore. Eleanor turned scarlet. You ungrateful! Sit down, Margaret said sharply from the corner. Laughter broke out. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Then I saw her make the mistake. She pulled a folder from her bag. I have my own evidence. Arthur promised me the company. This is a contract for a licensing deal with Caliber X, signed 3 months before his death. Let me see it, I said, stepping forward. She hesitated. I held out my hand. If it's valid, let's make it public. Slowly, she passed the folder. I flipped it open, then smiled. You forgot something, I said, turning it toward the screen. Section 3.1, subject to final ownership verification of the core patents. And then I held up the sealed envelope Eva had given me. The last fail-safe. Inside, a notarized letter from Arthur. To whom it may concern, the Caliber's proposal was drafted under Eleanor's pressure. I never signed it willingly. Any deals she claims to have secured were meant to stall her, nothing more. The real future of this company lies in Noah's hands, protected at all costs. Arthur Bennett. You could have heard a pin drop. Even Eleanor's attorney looked pale. I turned to the board. Ladies and gentlemen, if you support innovation with integrity, I ask for your vote today, not just for control, but for direction, for values, for the town this company helped build. A slow ripple of applause turned into a roar. The vote wasn't even close. Control of Bennett Bio Innovations, officially transferred to Origin Core Holdings, Eleanor and Isaac, stripped of voting rights, Chloe, appointed head of communications, Margaret, reinstated as senior advisor, Eva, invited to chair a new ethics oversight committee, Sophie, given full access to document the company's transformation for a public-facing transparency initiative. And Eleanor? She didn't attend the town hall that night, but her shadow loomed large. The auditorium at Ashfield Community Center was standing room only. Local biotech students, single mothers who'd benefited from the foundation Arthur once funded, former patients of early regenerative trials. Everyone wanted to know, what now? I stepped onto the stage. This company was never meant to be a gold mine, I said. It was meant to heal, and we lost sight of that. A pause. But not anymore. I unveiled our new project, the Bennett Foundation for Regenerative Equity, focused on funding rare disease research, community health innovation, and student mentorships. We weren't just rebooting a company, we were reclaiming a mission. I looked out into the crowd and found Sophie's eyes, Chloe's, Eva's. Even some board members who had once doubted me were nodding now. Applause rose slowly, then thundered. The next morning, Eleanor's lawyer quietly submitted paperwork relinquishing all claims. She'd agreed to a settlement, the house, her personal investments, and an NDA. She was leaving Ashfield for good. I didn't feel triumph. I felt peace. Dad had left me his life's work, not to defend, but to fulfill. Now that work had begun. 1 year later, I stood beneath the autumn sun on a balcony overlooking the Ashfield Innovation District, the project that had almost died with my father. But now it was alive. Below me, the sleek glass and greenery campus of Origin Core shimmered with light. Inside, teams of researchers, many fresh from scholarship programs we'd launched, were engineering real solutions: adaptive tissue grafts, regenerative spinal matrices, neural growth scaffolds. We weren't chasing IPOs. We were saving lives. To my left, the freshly unveiled statue of Arthur Bennett faced the community square. Not a towering, cold monument, but a warm bronze likeness of him at his lab desk, coat rolled at the sleeves, eyes focused with that same stubborn intensity I grew up admiring and resenting, and finally understanding. The plaque read, "Legacy is not in what we leave behind, but in who we lift up while we're here." In Arthur Bennett. Eva stood beside it, speaking to a group of local students about bioethics and environmental design. She had joined the company full-time 6 months ago, heading our sustainability arm. Chloe was giving a tour to visiting educators, now fully stepping into her role as the heart of our outreach efforts. She wasn't just Arthur's stepdaughter anymore. She was part of the future. Inside, Margaret led a new generation of interns through our archives, sharing Arthur's research, his breakthroughs, and quietly, his mistakes. And Sophie? She stood just behind me, arms folded, her notepad nowhere in sight for once. "You did it," she said quietly. "We did it," I corrected, smiling. "Without you, I wouldn't have known the truth." She grinned. "Well, it helped that your stepmother was a Bond villain." I laughed. Then I turned serious. "You think he'd be proud?" She didn't hesitate. "Noah, he is proud. I think he always was." I looked back out across the quad. Just behind the research hub stood the community clinic we'd built in his name, offering free regenerative care trials to low-income families. And right beyond that, the training center for high school biotech students, many of whom were children of former employees Arthur had mentored. The entire district wasn't just a facility, it was a tribute, a living legacy. Later that evening, as the celebration faded and twilight settled over Ashfield, I found myself alone on the old footbridge behind the lab, the same one Dad and I used to walk across after long nights of testing. This time, Sophie joined me. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the small black box that had been burning a hole there for weeks. She noticed. Her breath caught. "You sure?" she whispered. I turned toward her, the woman who had reminded me who I was, who stood by me when my family didn't, who helped me rebuild what others tried to destroy. "I'm not just sure," I said softly. "I'm certain." I opened the box. The ring wasn't flashy. Dad would have hated that. It was a sleek titanium band set with a small green gem, the same color as the laser pointer we'd used in our first lab together. Sophie didn't say anything. She just smiled through her tears, nodded, and pulled me into the tightest embrace I'd ever known. In the months that followed, life settled, not into stillness, but into rhythm. Tyler opened a small gastropub on the west end of town. Surprisingly, it was a success. Cooking, it turned out, was his true calling. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. Eleanor never returned. Last I heard, she'd remarried in Maine, now the face of a philanthropic art foundation. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I'd let go of anger, because my inheritance hadn't been just a set of patents. It was trust. It was belief. It was the gift of a second chance, not only to reclaim my father's vision, but to expand it into something even he couldn't have imagined. One evening, as I looked over final drafts of a new initiative, a regenerative skin program for burn victims, I found a scrap of paper folded into my desk drawer. One of Dad's old notes, scrawled in his unmistakable handwriting. P.S. If you're reading this, you've already won. Not because you beat her, but because you remembered why we started in the first place. I smiled. Yeah, Dad, I remembered.